For the world, shooting down a B-52 was a miracle, but for Vietnam, it was no different than using a gun to mine aluminum in their own sky. B-52s fell like ripe fruit, and wherever the wreckage of B-52s or other aircraft landed, locals had pots and pans for daily use. According to Vietnamese calculations, one wing of a Phantom jet could be melted to make 7 pots, 10 pans, and a dining set for 12 people. This is perhaps the clearest evidence of Vietnam's greatness, as many developed countries had to surrender to the B-52. Yet in Vietnam, a country lacking in many things, they were shooting down B-52s to make cookware. Facing the development of American radar technology, from signal jamming with metal strips to using EB-66 aircraft for jamming, was a challenging advancement for our troops. If jamming was done with metal strips, we could simply wait for them to settle and accurately detect the aircraft's coordinates. But with EB-66 jamming, we couldn't afford to wait, as it would cause significant losses. Moreover, metal strip jamming depended on weather conditions. In strong winds, these strips would quickly disperse and become ineffective. However, with EB-66 jamming, the US military was extremely proactive and not dependent on the weather at all. Because of this, our only option was to shoot down the EB-66, disable its jamming source, and force other aircraft to retreat. Back then, the EB-66 was nicknamed the B-52 without bombs due to its powerful jamming capabilities. Just 2 aircraft flying in an elliptical patterns about 100 kilometers ahead of the squadron could protect the entire flight formation. This was the most difficult challenge for our troops, but with the principle that even the most advanced weapons must have weaknesses, we researched ways to shoot down these EB-66. Since they flew in patterns, we just needed to understand these patterns and shoot them down. The difficulty was in determining their jamming position to place our anti-aircraft artillery. Because of this, we proactively combined with MiG-21 fighters for our attack. With the MiG-21's maneuverability, the EB-66 jammers become almost ineffective. Realizing their jamming devices could be shot down and their losses were increasing, the US had to pull the EB-66 out of their flight formations, causing other aircraft to lose courage to fly without the EB-66 protective layer. In the past, American pilots used to compare each bombing mission to going out to buy milk. Now with our combat capabilities, our troops have made American pilots understand that each takeoff is going to buy death. Because of this, in 1965 and 1966, the US was extremely afraid of Vietnam's SAM-2 missiles and had almost no way to counter them. However, determined to regain faith in Vietnam and with vast defense resources, the US sought every way to understand the SAM-2 missile's operating mechanism. Just knowing this mechanism would allow them to find a way to counter it. Back then, the US had bold ideas like using helicopters to steal SAM-2 launchers or bribing Russian allies to learn the secrets. But everything about the SAM-2 was only revealed when the Israeli army fought against Egypt. Egypt, heavily supplied with weapons by Russia, including SAM-2 missiles and MiG-21 aircraft, was very confident in facing Israel. They even had the support of the Arab alliance. Because of this, Egyptian pilots were overconfident, using MiG-21s to provoke Israel. MiG-21s were constantly circling around the Dimona nuclear plant, considered the heart and ultimate weapon of Israel against surrounding enemy countries. Fearing a surprise attack and that the aircraft might have cameras to photograph and expose weaknesses of the Dimona nuclear plant, Israel launched an attack on Egypt, catching them off guard. Using low-altitude aircraft to disrupt SAM-2 radars, the Egyptian army, initially boastful, was suddenly completely confused. Everyone fled, leaving behind their weapons, especially the SAM-2 missiles. The US, which had been struggling to find anyone selling SAM-2 parts for research, suddenly had complete sets of their ally Israel. Because of this, Vietnam faced even more difficulties. With intact SAM-2 missile sets, the US was researching ways to disrupt the radar, which our troops only discovered much later. To simplify, you can understand it like this. When a missile is launched, it has to report back to the station its current position and coordinates. Now the US was researching ways to disrupt the signal so that even if the radar responds, the control stations at home can't hear the response to determine coordinates. Because of this, our missiles, once launched, couldn't be guided to the aircraft's coordinate anymore, so the missiles would fly erratically and fall into civilian areas, causing houses to burn. Back then, people could tell if we hit or missed the target just by looking at the smoke from a missile. Simply put, when you miss the target, the missile keeps flying until it runs out of nitric acid, leaving behind a white smoke trail. When it hits the targets, the nitric acid burns and creates yellow smoke. Whenever white smoke appeared, it meant the enemy had used some method to neutralize our missiles. But eventually, we discovered the jamming method the US was using. In the past, they jammed many different frequencies. Almost all of our frequencies were jammed, but the power was spread out, so we could still see dimly. Now they knew exactly which frequency the missile and control station used to communicate, so they focused all their power to block that frequency. So we became completely blind, not even seeing dimly anymore. For this reason, missiles launched like children leaving home, losing all direction with no one being able to communicate with them. The problem became much more complicated. The more we fired, the more missiles we wasted, and if we fired at low angles, the missiles would fall into civilian areas, which was even worse. So how did our troops solve this problem? Stay tuned for the next episode of the Glorious History ICAL's ICAST project.